Good afternoon, guys. Can we all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good
Okay,
afternoon.
good afternoon. My name is Tosin Akinde Peters, President of University of Lagos SP Student Chapter. And I would like to welcome every one of us to today's event, the Women in Energy event. Uh, we're still waiting for people to join the meeting, but before that, I'd like to appreciate our keynote speaker for today, Mrs. Oghogho Effiom. And when I believe when it's 12:05, we'll start the session. The theme for today's Women in Energy event is prepare women for the challenges and leadership opportunities in Nigeria's energy industry. I believe this is a very interesting topic, and Mrs. Effion will just give us our insights and our views on this interesting topic. So while we wait for others to join us real quick, uh, we'll start by 12:05, and Mrs. Effion has a message for us. We have a get to know
Yes.
you. Okay, let's. I will let.
Yes. Hi, Tosin. Let
Yes.
me let me let me just kick off. I know we'll wait until 12:05, but for those of you who have joined early, I want to say thank you. It's always good to be punctual. But I've set up a small survey on Menti for us to get to know ourselves, because I know I'll be introducing myself and talking a little bit more about my experience and providing some advice. But I also want to get to know the audience, uh, things that they would like to know, and of course get to know who we have behind the screens. Let me see if my video is going to work. Okay, great, good stuff. So if you can go to www.menti.com, and then there's a survey there. There are just a few questions, and then I think there are just 4 questions really, but you can already kick off answering them, and then as people join. So I would go on mute for now and wait for another 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, so thank you, Mrs. Effiom. So those of us joining us, you can take the survey now, just before we start properly. Okay, so it's 12:05. Uh, because of time, I would like us to start immediately. Mrs. Effiom, can you please begin?
Okay, sure. Just I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, Tosin, you've disabled the screen share for the audience.
Okay, so let me
Is there a way you can put that for
try
just
now.
one?
Is it working now?
Let me check. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so let me know when you can see.
Uh, yes, it's up now. It's up now.
Okay, okay, awesome. So do we start now?
Yes, yeah. Let's begin.
Okay, good. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, this discussion. I've been looking forward to having this time with all of us today, and I've thought very carefully about what I want us to share. So I am already quite excited, especially by whatever questions, comments, and discussions that are going to take place today. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the next slide here. And I just want to share a few things. Of course, if you're going to work in the oil industry, you also know that safety is always the first thing that we talk about. So I welcome you, and I'll say to stay safe where we are and to enjoy the session. First of all, we're all going to be on headsets in some form or the other. So let's make sure that even though we have headsets on, that we can still hear our surroundings. Um, Also, in terms of posture, I want us to be able to move around from time to time. Sometimes we tend to be sitting for a long period of time. This session is an hour and a half, so try and move yourself around a bit to avoid having challenges. Uh, of course, general etiquette for online meetings is mute your microphone, mute your video when you're not speaking. And of course, if you have a question, there's a functionality there where you can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat box. And of course, let's all be patient with the internet and the network and all that. I also know that the SP Lagos section is going about using different streaming methods today. So even if you can't participate right now because of maybe your poor network, you can always come back to listen to what we've discussed here. So with that, I would like to introduce myself a bit. I graduated from University of Benin as a geologist, production geologist. As you know, production geology in many companies are part of petroleum engineering. So even in SP International, you have geology and reservoir dynamics and description as part of SP International. So I graduated from Geology University of Benin, certified geologist by the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, and I have an MSc as well. I've worked in a number of two places really, or three places really. I worked briefly in Total, and I worked in Halliburton before I joined Shell, and I've been in Shell for a very long time, really. So overall, my entire career in the oil industry is about 20 years, um, and those are the jobs that I have done in that time. Last year, I won the SP International Regional Service Award. Currently the section chair of University of Lagos section at the moment. Outgoing, of course, because my tenure ends in another couple of months. So you will have a new section chair for Lagos section. Prior to that, I was programs chair, section secretary, career guidance, and other positions I've held on the Lagos section board over the years as part of my volunteerism. Apart from Lagos section, I've also been a volunteer for NIACE, which is the Nigerian Council's community of all the sections in Nigeria. And I've chaired many committees there. And even in SP International, I've also chaired a committee for the soft skills workshop in Dubai in 2016. So those are the career highlights. I've also, I'm a parent, I'm a mother, I'm a wife. So I have a husband and I have two children, two sons who are teenagers at the moment. My second son's birthday is exactly a week from now. So we're looking forward to that. So that's just by way of an introduction. And I'm hoping that we can go on to Menti let me just see if anyone has been able to sign in. Okay, so I'm not seeing any responses yet, but I'm going to leave it up. And as people come in, I'm expecting that we should be able to put in responses just to say, how are you today? How are you feeling today? And what do you expect to hear from this session? So that would help to guide the conversation, because I know that this is, it's not just a presentation where I come and just talk. I would like to have more of a discussion with us. So I would leave that up, and then audiences, as they come in, I hope they'll be able to access the survey and respond. Okay, so I would go directly to the presentation right now, and I'll start by telling us what the good news is. The good news is that gender balance means business, which means that women in the oil industry, having women in the oil industry, has been shown to increase productivity. Having women in the industries in general, has been shown to increase productivity. As a matter of fact, it's, if you even think about it, you have men and women in the population, and they're equal, just about equal proportions. So if you exclude 50% uh, of your population in anything, you find out that you will not get the best results from that. So just by conventional wisdom, it tells us that we women have a lot to play in industries, not just in the oil industry. But more importantly is the report that I read yesterday, and I've had this report for a bit now, and I'll share it along with my slides when I'm sending to your section chapter president. And essentially, in 2019, McKinsey has been carrying out this survey for the last 5 years, and the 2019 one came out, and the results are online. I think if you go into the link I've highlighted there in red, you would be able to see what was shared then. But essentially, I've listed out some very important points there. And it says that in the last 5 years, we've seen women rise to the top of the levels of all companies. And that's the good news. So which means that we're seeing more and more women getting to high senior levels in companies, not just oil companies, but companies in general. And there used to be this conventional, there used to be some wisdom that women like have to leave the workforce to be able to take care of families and all. And over the last decade or so, they are saying that women are still remaining, even when they take some time out to raise kids, they still come back into the industry. So they still participate in the workforce, and they are doing their part. So there's definitely a desire from the women to participate and do their part. And in terms of asking for promotions, there used to be this thing where they say women don't sell themselves, women don't ask for promotions, women don't demand what they are worth. But this survey is saying that indeed, women are also asking for promotions. They are negotiating their salaries at the same rate as men. So we also have begun to recognize our worth and ask for those things that we want. In terms of companies are actually much more committed to gender diversity than ever before. So which means that most companies are beginning to have gender balance and gender equality programs and policies and so on and so forth. So we are seeing the gains of it. And I think it's based on all those policies that we're now seeing the gains of it in terms of seeing more senior women in leadership positions. So that's quite good. Many companies are also getting work-life flexibility is beginning to rise. And I'm saying not just internationally, but even in Nigeria, many companies are beginning to say, you can work from home or you can work flexible hours and so on and so forth. So in terms of the good news, so that's why I termed it the good news, things are improving. They're not as bad as they used to be back in the day, but they're definitely improving. Now, I'll go on to the next slide, which is, unfortunately, there is a reality. So there's a good news, but there's a reality. And the reality is that if you look at this chart I have in this middle upper portion there, this is a representation of women in the oil and gas industry. Now, it says that at entry level, you have a good percentage of women coming into the industry. Still less than half, but that's fine. I mean, 38% at entry level is still quite significant. But as you go into managerial, directorship, VPS, VP, and C-suite, you see the numbers begin to plummet. And indeed, if you even go into this in a micro detail, you'll find out that the drop between the entry level and the manager level is quite significant in the number of years. The longer you stay in the oil industry, the fewer and fewer women you would find at that senior level. So what exactly is causing that? Why exactly is it? We've already heard the good news that women are staying in the oil industry longer. There are all flexible programs, there are policies in place, there are all kinds of things going on. So there's some good parts of it, but why is it that we still have such a small number going into the C-suite over the years? And there's a phenomenon called the glass ceiling, and there's another one called the broken rung. And McKinsey is saying that these two things are responsible for these drops that you are seeing. Now, the glass ceiling is something that I heard even when I was growing up. My mom even talked about it. My mom also worked in university system, so she also talked about the glass ceiling and all that. Of course, it didn't mean anything to me while I was growing up, but I think as I've grown older and as I've come into the industry, I've begun to see a little bit of that myself. So, what's the glass ceiling? It essentially talks about some barriers that are in place that prevent women from rising up to senior leadership. It's if you look at something called unconscious bias, or if you just look at bias in general, if you read up on it, you would find out that those are the things that are that really are impediments. Um, so it's not the biggest obstacle though, because one thing I've heard as I've stayed in the industry for so long is, oh, by the time they want to hire women for very senior positions, they're like, well, there are not that many women. That's why, we don't have women that have the experience. She doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the credibility. She doesn't have the she doesn't have what it takes to become a C-suite professional. But the truth about the whole matter is, it comes to the second point there, which is the broken rung, which is if you don't give women the opportunities to prove themselves from the time that they are young, at what point are they going to get the experience to become the leaders that they're expected to be? I mean, there are many women that come into the oil industry with high potentials and so on and so forth, but there are many things that also stand in their way from getting the experience um, that is required to give them those strategic roles that takes them into the C-suite positions. So it's one of those things where I say, and I think that's a bit of bad news for those of the ladies who are listening here, which is you're likely to experience this in the course of your career, whether it's the glass ceiling or it's the broken rung. But since you guys are still in the university system, you're likely to experience the broken rung, and there are many ways it manifests itself. So you're in a group of people, and taking on responsibilities, for example, you may not be given those opportunities. You will have to take them because ordinarily you may not be the first choice, and that's just the way it is. I don't think it doesn't have anything to do with whether somebody likes you or whether you are competent or not. Sometimes you just may not even be in the room when this conversation is being taken place, and you find out that somebody else is being given that opportunity and you don't. Now, once or twice, if that happens a couple of times, that's bad enough. But imagine if consistently you are overlooked for leadership kind of roles. You are overlooked for assignments that would enhance your skills. You are overlooked for things that will put you in charge of things. And typically, and I'm sorry to say this, but typically sometimes the things that they would give, the kind of assignments they would give a lady, for example, is usually less tangible, less meaty, less strategic than what they would give to your male counterparts. And that's because there's always the fear of, oh, are we sure she can really do it? And this is not because sometimes it comes from a good place. It's not because they don't think that you can. I'll give you an example. There was a colleague of mine who was being shortlisted for an assignment overseas, and her boss, when her boss was talking to other people on the panel, the discussion, they were saying, "Oh, this lady just got married. She has a baby. So let's not include her. Let's not give her this assignment because it will mean she would be separated from her family, and we don't want her to be separated." So they really thought they were doing the best for her. They thought that they were helping her by making that kind of decision. Unfortunately, what they did not know was that the husband had been overseas for a long time, had been trying to get his family to at least come and spend some time with him. It hadn't quite happened. So by giving her that international assignment, she would have been able to join her husband overseas with her family, and she would have been much more productive. Now, what happened was the ladies, somebody in the system, one of the managers now said, look, instead of making that assumption for her, why don't we ask her? And they called her into a meeting and says, look, if you say no, it's okay. If you say yes, it's also okay. But this is what we are thinking for you. And she was so excited. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you may not be lucky to even have someone advocate for you like that in your absence. You may not have someone who would call you to say, yes or no, do you think you can actually do this, and so on. So you may experience this in your course of your career. And of course, I hope that you don't. I hope that the strides that those of us who are ahead of you have made, and the noise that we make about these kinds of biases, I hope that by the time you are coming into the industry, that things would have improved significantly. But in case they have not, there are things that you can do to give yourself a fighting chance, and I'm going to be discussing those shortly. So if you have any questions, you can please type them into the chat box. If you want me to speak about something in more details, you can also put them in chat box, and I can address those when the time comes. So what exactly can you do, and how can you help yourself? And this portion of this discussion is going to address three parts. One of it is knowing the facts. So you should know the facts, know your business. And I'm not just talking about the oil and gas business per se. I'm seeing a lot of women also becoming entrepreneurs. I'm seeing a lot of women um, going into business for themselves, starting their own companies, starting to do other things other than oil and gas. And that's fine. One of the most successful business women that I know of, she had whether a first class degree or something in chemical engineering, and she never went into the oil industry. She never went into any industry. She went and then she started her own business. She's an extremely successful person. So if you don't intend to stay in the oil industry or get into the oil industry, that's perfectly okay. That's your choice, and it's good enough that you can make that choice. Now, the first thing is, of course, know your business, be creative, and always be professional. Don't be a dinosaur and move with the times and technology. So, like, look at what this COVID has done for us now. We've had to move all our activities online. So, I'm also seeing that the online community provides a platform for us to be able to make something of it. So, look look around you and know what's going on. Communicate. Don't be shy to ask for what you want. Ask and be clear and be objective in your mind. Now, if you ever have a boss, know who your boss is. There's something that we say in my company that says, "What my boss likes, I love." So, which means essentially whatever it is that your boss is trying to achieve is what you should spend your time doing as an employee of that person. That's what you should spend your time trying to solve, because there's no use having an employee who is not plugged into the bottom line and the business imperatives of any company. So I would encourage you to always communicate, ask questions, and be present. Communication is very key, and be honest about it. Understand what's happening globally and what are the changes that you need to be aware of. Create a global network. Now, the good thing about the online activities is that you can reach as many people as you want globally. I know people who are in right there with you in Lagos, and they're selling their wares, and they're selling their products and marketing their business to international communities. So by virtue of that, you have a very big platform to be able to reach the world essentially. So use it. And then look at the oil industry as well. What are the trends? For the first time in history, the oil price went down to negative. The WTI price, West Texas International price, went down to negative. What does that mean for the oil industry in Nigeria? What do you think is happening? Have you tried to find out what the impact of low oil price and COVID is on the oil industry? There's a marginal bid round going on. I think it's going to go on. Either it's gone on already, or it's going to go on later on this year. What does that mean for the oil industry? Why don't you find out and try and think about what it means? Look, at the past, at what has happened in the past, and of course, try and predict what's in the future. Now, you also have a very, very good platform called SPA International that gives you a window into what's going on internationally. So, in that case, you can always benchmark yourself against your peers internationally, because that's what's going on, that's what's happening now. It's not enough for you to graduate from University of Lagos and say, you know, that's your claim to fame, or that's all that you have. You always have to be able to benchmark yourself with your peers internationally and say, well, if I were to compete, for example, with somebody from MIT or whatever, would I really be able to? to compete favorably? And the answer is yes. Don't get me wrong. The answer is yes, because I've seen graduates from Nigeria go on internationally to do fantastic and amazing things. But that's as a collective. But I'm talking about you individually. You have a platform now. In my time, there was nothing like that, but you have a platform now to be able to benchmark yourself, and of course to know where your gaps are, so that you can improve them. Now, in terms of goal setting, I can't say this enough. When you start to in anything in life, you always have to have your own personal goals and priorities. What may work for you may not work for somebody else. What is important and what is urgent? Always learn how to distinguish what is important from what is urgent. Now, some things that are urgent are not necessarily things that are important, and some things that are important are not necessarily urgent. So figure out what needs to be done as and when, and dedicate the time to do it. Now, when I say execute your job very well, it just seems like a bit of a cliche. Yes, do your job well, and it's like, yeah, whatever. But the truth is, as women, your mistakes are not as easily forgiven. Your mistakes are not as easily overlooked. It always comes down to competence. And when the time comes, unfortunately, you're, you become a representative of the entire gender, which is not always right. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But in anything that you do, figure out what motivates you, what brings out the best from you. If it's in working for yourself that brings out the best and motivates you, then do that. If you feel by now that I want to get married later on in life, let that be your priority. That's your choice. Don't let anybody um bully you or steamroll you into making a decision that may not be right for you. But also understand that it may not be somebody else's choice. So somebody else may say, you know what? And I had friends like that in university as well. They're like, look, I'm not using my certificate to do anything. I just want to get married and have 5 children. And that was fine. Everybody has what motivates them and what keeps them happy. So everybody's different. But know what motivates you and what works for you. And be realistic with respect to timing. I have people who um, say they want to be, maybe for example, I want to be the CEO of a multinational company. And it's fantastic to have goals. It's fantastic to have ambitions. But then ask yourself, and maybe by research again, look around people who have gotten to those levels and ask yourself how long it took them to get there. Some people are lucky, like the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, but those people are unicorns. They're not, they're once in a generation, maybe. And then you see some other people who has taken them a long time to get to where they are. And then look at the skills that they have. Look at how they even got there themselves. Don't compare yourself with somebody who inherited his company, for example. That may not be your reality. But be realistic about your timing. And of course, if you find out that it's going to take you 20 years to become a CEO, then maybe you may decide that that's not what you want. You want something that's much more faster. Of course, the fastest way to become a CEO is to become your CEO, which is to create your company and then you become a CEO. So that's for that. And then of course, I'm talking about taking initiatives, being innovative, and I talked about creativity on the other the bar on the left. But again, innovation comes in here, initiatives and so on. Now you also may want to job shadow somebody if you're not in your dream job. Now, initially, the first few jobs you may get may not be the best that they may not be the best. It may just be what is available. So you take what is available, and then you begin to job shadow, which is look for someone whose career you admire and then begin to shadow them. Find out the habits that makes them successful. Find out what they've learned over time, and then ask the questions and volunteer for projects in the area that you wish to go. I have a colleague who is currently she's in the technical line, and she wants to get more experience in the non-technical space, in the communication space. So she volunteers her time for a communication outfit where she can write articles for them, edit their articles, help them in their internal and external communication, and so on and so forth. I know someone who also spends her time um, in a film, and this her side, of course, like a side hustle, whatever you call it, but she's really very interested in making films. So she met up with someone who is in the film industry, and then she does some editing work, some advertisements, and so on and so forth. So those are ways that you can continue to increase those skills while you are in whatever job that you are, even if this job is not your dream job. And of course, there are things that you can do for yourself. And this is really the most important bit here. And one of it is challenge your own stereotypes. Um, so there are many assumptions we make of ourselves, and that feed into a certain stereotype. I can't do this, I can't do that, or I can't do this until I do this. I can't do that until I marry before I do this. Or if I have children, I won't be able to go to the rig, or I won't be able to go offshore, or I can't work in the oil industry if I'm a single, if I'm not married with children, or if I'm single, or and you already begin to make decisions on your career even before you even start. So you can have something like you've just entered the industry, but when assignments come up, you say, okay, I don't want to take this assignment yet because I'm expecting that I will soon be married or I will soon be pregnant, but you're not pregnant yet. So when an assignment comes up, you say, well, okay, I would leave this one first until later, maybe after I've had my children, then I can come. No, there's no assignment that's waiting for you to have, to make your decisions and come back. You may not get that opportunity again. So why don't you take the opportunity you have for your initially, if it may be difficult, and then while you're also making your own personal plans as you go along. So challenge your own stereotypes, um, and then push yourself a little bit further if you can. Really, what they call put your leg on the accelerator. I'm recommending the book called Lean In to as many of us, by Sheryl Sandberg. It was a really good book for me when I was also coming when the book came out. I think I saw it immediately the book came out, and I want us to look at, especially coming up into the industry, because she's a CEO of Facebook, but there are many things that she talked about that are very systemic and things that are common to almost every industry, especially those of us in tech and energy. Don't ever expect any special treatment, and that's the truth. So even though we are in the 2020 and you may not be in the workforce for another year or two, the truth about the whole matter is you may get to a situation where you you are put on a rig or you are in a facility somewhere and they don't have facilities for women, for example. Coveralls are not made for women, so you find that coveralls are can be quite uncomfortable for women to use. So don't expect any special treatment. They're not going to order a fresh batch of female coveralls for just only the 2 or 3 women that are in the entire company. So there are times when you'll be in one of the a remote location somewhere if you're in the industry, and you find that there's only one toilet, both men and women, and one toilet and one bathroom, and both men and women are going to have to share it. You're going to be on a rig somewhere and you're sharing your quarters with men. So how do you manage that? You have to, and you have to remain professional, obviously. So nobody's going to give you any special treatment just because you're a woman. Nobody's going to say, oh, let's promote her because she's a woman, or let's give her assignment because she's a woman. It's not like that. You only get those things because you are the best. So that's it. So don't expect that. And again, I could talk about choices, and this is really very important. I don't know how many women we have in the group right now, but the choice of the spouse whoever you choose to marry, is going to have a very lasting and profound impact on the trajectory of your career. That's if you choose to marry or if you choose not to marry. But if you choose to get married, whoever you choose as your spouse is very important, because I find, and this is again my experience, it's my opinion, it's my experience, but I find out that we sometimes don't put enough rigor into those decisions about who to marry, when to have children, and so on and so forth. We don't put as much rigor into it as we would when we are going into university. So it can lead to maybe a bit of confusion or some kind of conflicts later on in life. So you really need to choose somebody who is very supportive of your career, someone who understands your drive, your passion, and so on and so forth. And then you make your decisions as a family going forward, because it matters. It definitely matters. So don't think it will just happen, you know, by magic. You have to something that you have to think about, and you obviously have to plan it. Then this again is for us women. It says amplify, don't diminish others. I also have seen a lot of it in the industry where, in general, where they say, oh, women bosses are very difficult to work for. Oh, women colleagues are very difficult, and that's just simply not true. Now, yes, there are difficult bosses, and yes, there are bosses that are very have very good team leadership skills. But the truth is, it can be a male, it can be a female. I've had fantastic female bosses. I've also have one or two terrible female bosses. And I've also had terrible male bosses. It doesn't mean that I should now um, refuse to work with women ever again. It doesn't work. That's a very short-sighted view to take. So in terms of complaining about female bosses, I don't want to work with female bosses, I don't want to work with other women, don't do that. It really doesn't help. And the reason for that is because every female that you see is now becomes a representation of the entire gender. So that you are a certain way, the next woman coming behind you will be painted with the same brush. So if you are unable to work with other women, then it then reinforces the stereotypes that women can't work together. But that's not true. The Lagos Section Board, for example, has almost half of the people there are female, and it has been such a fantastic working experience. And these are not people, we're all from different walks of life, different backgrounds, we're from different companies, but it has been really fantastic from that perspective. So it's a myth, and the sooner we as women stop propagating that myth, the better for us. So don't expect women. Every other woman is going to be perfect, or that because she's a woman, she's going to have to be like this or she's like that. We're too many. We're too varied to conform to any stereotype. But you yourself know what your limitations are, know what your weak points are, and for goodness sake, if you do not enjoy it, find a way out. And that's because if you're in a job or doing something that you don't enjoy, or even a course of study you don't enjoy, you might have found yourself there. Maybe you fell into it. Maybe you entered into it perchance. But if you don't enjoy it, maybe find a way out. And that's because you spend a lot of time, about 40 hours a week is what I wrote there, on your job. So if you don't enjoy it, your attitude, it will show up in your attitude. And then that now becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's now a case of, oh, she's not fully engaged in her job, and so on and so forth. And you become passive and become um, less engaged. Now, which of course is not what you want. Now, the last thing there is for you to get mentors and maintain communication. So there are two things there. One is to get mentors. Look for people who have achieved what you want to achieve, and then um, as much as possible, get to know them, build a friendship or relationship with them. The second thing there is to maintain communication. I've seen a number of people who say, oh, my mentor doesn't call me, or my mentor doesn't communicate with me. Oh, sorry, the onus on mentor-mentee relationship is on you who are looking for something. You are the one looking for it. And if you've chosen your mentor well, then obviously your mentor is somebody who is busy, who is doing a number of things. So if you've chosen well, then your mentor would obviously have other things that they're also juggling. So it's up to you to reach out, to ask questions, to be engaged, to continue the communication, and then to get what you can get out of it. Of course, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Mentors and mentee relationships have to be based on some sort of mutual understanding and chemistry. So if it doesn't work, then you can of course seek other mentors. And when I say mentors, notice I said mentors, I didn't say mentor. So you have different mentors for different stages of your life, or for different reasons, different types of mentors, and so on and so forth. Of course, have male mentors and have female mentors, and have there's no limit to as many. The more advice you get, the more refined your decisions would be. So those are the key points I wanted to share. I think that is the last slide that I have, coming up to um, 12:40 now, and I'm happy to take questions and comments if any. Okay, Tosin, over to you.
Oh yes, thank you very much for that interesting presentation. And it's time for us to have a rather interesting session, which is Q and A. So quickly, I have a question myself. I would
Go
like
ahead,
to ask
please.
that now. So, from your experience as a lady in the energy industry, can you please just highlight some of the challenges that you have faced personally while, like, all through your journey, and how you have overcome them?
Okay. So I think I mentioned a few of them during the course of my discussion, which is that many times your achievement can be diminished for one reason or the other. And I'll give you one personal example. So when I was coming into the industry, when I was changing jobs, by then and I had like I mentioned, I have two children. I'd had my first son, and many of those things have happened really around the times when I've taken a break to have children. Of course, I do not regret my having a family at all, because at the end of the day, that was my choice. That's what I wanted. But at the time at which I was having, by the time I was coming back, there were certain I had to take a step back. Essentially, it was like I had to take a step back because it was like, oh, you've been away for a few months, and your peers have still been working, so you're going to have to start again from scratch in your development program, which was fine. So for me, it goes back to what I said earlier, that when you make a choice for yourself, you have to be okay with your choice. You have to be at peace with your choice. It was fine with me, and as God will have it, when I came back, I almost came back with a renewed, and that's why I say you have to be okay with your choices. I came back with a renewed zeal and energy. So it's almost like somebody, your mates are on 30 kilometers an hour, you take a break for 3 months and then you come back. Of course, you can't join them at 30 kilometers per hour. You have to be at 100 kilometers an hour, which is exactly what I did. Yes, I was raising kids and all that, but I didn't spend my time, sitting down and saying, oh, who is me, who is me. I spent my time, I completed my MSc. I did some online trainings while I was at home. I came back with renewed zeal and energy, and as God would have it, I was able to catch up and, in some cases, surpass what was expected of me. So there are things like that. There are times when, and of course, men don't go on 3 months maternity leave. They go on two. I think nowadays you have maybe 2 weeks paternity leave, which is fine. But you have to be okay with your decision. I made a decision that I wanted to have a family, and I had my fantastic, beautiful. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of them here, but and they've all grown up now and all that. They're teenagers now, so it's it was okay. Make a decision and decide you want to take a year off. I have colleagues, for example, who took a year or two of sabbatical. I want to go do a master's, take a sabbatical, go away, come back, and you come back and like, wow, gosh, all my colleagues have moved past me now, and that's fine. But you came back, you went away for a reason, and you've come back. Just put your foot to your foot to your accelerator and continue going. You have to be okay with your choices. That's the entire thing that I'm going to say. There were times when I said, for example, there was a promotion I was up for at some point, and it wasn't a good time for me because the promotion would have meant I had to move away. And it wasn't a good time. My older son then was in primary six. He was going to, he needed to write a common entrance. And I'm like, look, I don't want to move my family at this time. So sorry, I can't take this new job. So I had to, decline a progression. Did the progression still come? Yes, but it came several years later. So it meant that I was, behind for a longer period than I had ever expected. I've had assignments internationally as well, where they say, oh, sorry, but this international assignment, you can't go with your family. And I had to make arrangements for my kids to stay with their dad, and then my mother and then their grandmother came, stayed with them, and so on and so forth. But it was like, my heart was broken because I couldn't see my kids for many months. But that was a difficult decision I had to make. And of course, by this time, the kids were getting older. I had to talk to them to say, guys, this is what's going on, and so on and so forth. So it's about making choices. You will always have to make choices. But when you make a choice, be ready to accept the consequences, because that's the way life is. Be okay with it. So that's it. And then of course, in the time that if you have to take any time off, for example, you should use that time off as productively as possible. So those are my experiences. Of course, they are very particular to me. You asked for my experiences, and that's what I'm sharing. It may not be the same for everyone. So I guess it's just to say, make your choices, be comfortable with them, and if you have to take any time off, for example, do it and make the best of it, and just continue to put in your best. Recognize that sometimes you have to work twice as hard as everybody else, do twice as much before someone can even say, oh, I should really try it though. Meanwhile, you really worked, you worked your butt off. So that's where I would like to leave it for now.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for for sharing that with us. There's also a question from YouTube live stream, and she says some women are known to have very difficult time of the month. Does the industry respect that time, or they expect them to behave normally?
So if you have a medical condition, right, that makes that time of the month very difficult, then it's a medical condition. Of course, the oil industry understands it's it's like saying there are some people that have disabilities, for example, and they work in the oil industry, and they work successfully. Now, there are things that you can do to help to alleviate that. But if you have a medical condition, that means that every month you have to be away for 3 to 5 days or however long as it is. Get that condition checked out and get it in there as this is something that you have to work with. This is something that the company has to work for. If you are lucky and you have an understanding boss and you have an understanding company, then it's something that can be taken in. Again, too, if unfortunately for you, the company says that overall your output is less because of those time off that you've taken, just know that when you come back, you have to do everything in your power to make up for that lost time. So that's it. It makes you a little bit more. You have to be a little more strategic about how you work, what to do, and how you go about it. But sometimes it's better to be as transparent as possible such that everybody knows this is what you are struggling with. But when you come back, you have to come back times 100 almost. You have to come back with a renewed zip and really, really put your foot to the accelerator and let your output talk for you from that perspective. They shouldn't miss you when you are gone for the 3 or 5 days or 5 or 7 days that you're away. But that's a lot of time for you to take out from work every month. So it's just what do you do when you are back? You have to be able to prove your worth in being there. Yeah. So I'm seeing a question here from the Zoom chat. I'll just go ahead and read it out. It says, women should be allowed to make choices. Is it possible that some of their choices are based on society's biases?